First of all, I would like to thank you very much for addressing these very important topics in your time. I'm grateful to you for this. And now we'll have about 10 minutes for a discussion on very important questions. And before doing so, I would like just to summarize that the presentations converge to the point that health research is really vital for healthcare. And health is wealth in Europe, and we see there an opportunity for social and scientific growth. However, we have to maintain the patient safety and the data integrity, and we have really to be very transparent. And the ethical discussion is at a very high level, and we see some quite good questions that have been put from all speakers, and maybe the concluding slides of Dr. Vidalis have given us a framework to start our discussion. And I would, in this sense, introduce the first question to Dr. Crowley. If he feels that the new regulation and the discussion in Europe between the Commission, the regulatory bodies, and ethics committees is really going to ensure the research integrity. Do you feel more comfortable that we can avoid ethical issues in the conduction of clinical research in Europe, where Europe is really seen as the place where patient safety and is very well protected?
Thank you. I think today, generally, if you go around the world, you see in other places in the world, Europe is very much looked up to and expected to give a kind of direction with regard to ethics in clinical research. And many of us from Europe are involved with that as well. I think that the challenge, which the other speakers have both mentioned much better, really is the relationship between the ethical review practices, the ethics committees within the various member states, and the regulatory authorities there. And as you can see, as you made very clear, this regulation that's being proposed won't touch the ethics committees at all, and it won't really change, or it's not intended to change either, how ethics committees work, nor is it really going to have any impact on the relationship between the ethical review process within individual member states and that of the regulatory process in the member states. So I think this question still remains open. I would just highlight one point, and that's from your talk as well, is really the most important part of this legislation is that it's a regulation, not a directive. Yeah. If there's one change, if there's one difference, it's just merely in that single word there, that it is a regulation and not a directive. And if there's an achievement that the European Commission is probably looking to have with this legislation right now, it is to have a unified, common, let's say, legal text as a common reference point, rather than the kind of diversity and quote unquote, but very importantly, approximations that you get with a directive. So I think this is the key word and the key thing that is really trying to be achieved without, as what we did have with the directive, a kind of going inside of how regulatory authorities work at national levels or how ethics committees work at national levels. Now there's some more distance to that. The common portal for submission, some ideas about insurance and things like that, but not too much interference in the lives, let's say, of the member states and how they're doing things.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Crowley. And I will continue with Dr. Torbert, asking him the question, do you feel that in this current period of deep financial crisis in Europe, and particularly in Greece, that it is really appropriate, the appropriate time to invest and energize the clinical trials field?
I think the short answer is yes, I think it's exactly the time to do that, although clearly it's probably the most difficult time to do that. I think when any government tries to save money in healthcare, and particularly in pharmaceuticals, often the easiest ways and most reliable ways of saving cash today, which governments are required to do, are usually those ways that present difficulties for innovative industries and aren't necessarily the best decisions for the future. The fact is, decisions made today are going to impact on the future attractiveness of Europe, of Greece. So I certainly think that having an eye to making a platform for innovation in countries like Greece right now in the difficult austerity period is exactly what we need to do.
Thank you for encouraging us to do so. We will do our best and hope that the audience and all stakeholders will agree on that message. And then, Dr. Vidalis, can you please help us with the criteria for selecting the cases where we have to consent patients that are in an emergency situation? How can we do this?
Yes, thank you. Well, this is a difficult question. I mean, try to find some, first of all, the meaning of an emergency clinical trial. If we have an emergency medical act, for example, this is this has sense, but why we do need to perform research in emergency situations?
For instance, patients that are in ICU and there is in a life-threatening situation.
Yes.
And you have a research product that can really provide therapeutic benefit to this patient. Yes,
this is one example. Another example may be that if we have an event of pandemics or an urgent vaccination of the people, of the population, I think clinical trials have been performed during the H1N1 flu. So this is another example. I think that in such cases, it would be better if we have an exclusive determination of such cases. And to determine 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 such cases with very, very, very strict terms, and leaving all the other cases to the regular clinical trials procedure. This is, let's say, a guarantee for the patient's safety, first of all. And because I believe that in emergency situations, the part of the ethics would be maybe the infringement in the part in the ethical assessment of the trial is very, very probable. Would be very, very probable.
Thank you very much, and I believe all these areas will attract the attention of all stakeholders during the discussion at the EU Parliament and between member states and the Commission. On a second round, with a very short question and very short answer to you, maybe Richard, what is your view on the transparency of the data that it is pursued with the new regulation?
I think as a general comment on transparency of data, clearly that's a hot topic at the moment, and certainly, you know, FPA absolutely kind of recognises the value in transparency, and I think it's true to say that companies now are publishing and releasing a lot more information than they ever used to. I think that has to be seen as a positive thing. What I would say, though, is I guess disclosure of data always has to be weighed up for me against three things, really. One is the kind of legal requirement to protect intellectual property is one. Issues around commercial confidentiality, where it's not in the public interest to necessarily divulge confidential information, I think is two. And then finally, of course, almost most importantly, patient information, patient individual data. And I think those three considerations are serious and worth reflecting on. And I think whilst certainly individual FPA member companies will respond to requests for data on a case-by-case basis and make their own decisions, I think from a policy point of view, we need to make sure that these issues are considered properly, and we continue to talk to the EMA, for example, about ways of doing that in an appropriate way.
Thank you. Francis, how do you view the role of the patients' organization in the discussion on ethical aspects and the new regulation?
I think the patients' organizations are really important. It goes back really to what was said at the beginning of the conference today with regard to the role of the public and how to bring the public into this idea of health research as being a necessary part of their healthcare program. And patient organizations, be they broad in general for larger disease or smaller and more narrow in rarer diseases, I think they really help to make research possible. And I think at the European level now, we have several broader patient organizations representing smaller patient organizations as well. And I think they play a really important role now in how we discuss this legislation as we go forward. Yeah.
Thank you. And Takis, what is your view on the data privacy matters? Do you see that this field is going to be further changed in terms of requirements for clinical trials?
Well, I think this regulation will facilitate the data protection in Europe regarding clinical trials. Let me say that the data protection in Europe has already a unified legal framework, which is a particular directive, and we have already data protection authorities all over Europe, and they function as contact points, and I think there is a robust protection of data. To have a unified instrument such as regulation in the field of clinical research will facilitate the data protection. But if you allow me, I would like to comment a point that Dr. Crowley raised before regarding the ethical assessment. I was wondering if we could have an ethical assessment at the level of the union. And why? Because we don't have, in other research fields, such as the embryo research or the animal research, there are difficulties with the local or the national particularities. In clinical research, we have already ethical principles established in Europe. So this could be the first step to establish an ethical assessment at the level of the European Union. I don't see the reason for why we have a national competence in this field.
I think, sorry to say, it is a very important question.
Yes.
But we are running out of time, and
Okay.
I think this could be
It's just a comment.
around
It's just a comment.
roundtable discussion.
Of course.
So we may discuss afterwards, but before concluding our table, I would like to give an opportunity to the audience to address a question that it is of particular interest to them, which was not covered by our presentations, discussions, and open questions. Ο κύριος Σιβολαπέγκο.
Maybe it's worth mentioning that Greece was one of the first countries that regulated by law. Maybe it's worth mentioning at this stage that Greece has been one of the first countries that regulated by law the clinical trials before even the Oviedo Convention, and I'm referring to the very famous 1983 FEC that we have always been following until recently, the 2001-20, which became a law the 31st of December 2003. So I think it's worth mentioning that it was one of the first countries that implemented by law in the European Union the clinical trials.
Thank you for pointing this out. This is an element that Greece at some point in time took really an innovative initiative before anyone else in Europe. So there is a potential here and a momentum, and maybe we can really see our future through the healthcare and health research joined together for medical innovations for patient safety. So thank you very much. I'm delighted to have had this pluripotent discussion with the panel of a philosopher, an economist, and a lawyer. Thank you very much, and apologies to the organizers for the slight delay.